Right. So there was Bitcoin, and one of the things I think was an issue that, well, maybe the only thing Satoshi could have done better was he could have called the token Bitcoin and the underlying protocol something different. And so what got lost in the conversation amongst a lot of people, but not amongst everyone, is that the protocol, which today we know as the blockchain, was also called Bitcoin. Vitalik was smart, and he called one Ether and one called the project Ethereum, but he called the token Ether. So he understood that there was a distinction between the two. And what made that really so revolutionary was that now it was like, it was money, but now all of a sudden it kind of became programmable. And not only programmable, but like in a really simple way. I mean, some of these crowd sales that you're seeing are 40, 50 lines of code, smart contracts, that are doing really complex stuff in a very compact way. And so there was, now all of a sudden you could imagine what the underlying blockchain technology could do was, it was to the point where the phrase became decentralize everything. And so I think we're beyond the discussion of the technical aspects of it, but suffice it to say, now we saw, a lot of us called it Bitcoin 2.0. And you could now take this thing that we call money, but now all of a sudden it can be taken and become all other kinds of things and programmable in a very easy, elegant manner.
But they had a problem before they met you.
Oh, yeah, right. So I met with Vitalik about a month or so after he wrote the white paper, and the issue.
He was 12 at the time?
He was, yeah, well, I mean, he was out of diapers, not very far out of diapers, and he traded his pacifier for a pen, but he was a Sumatra kid. He's something special. I can tell the story. He lived with me for about 6 months while we're going through the crowd sale process, on and off. But for the most part, it was kind of him and me hanging out. And one time I looked at him and I said, "What are you doing?" He was typing, and he was looking at this book. And he was typing, he was looking at this book. And he said, "Well, I'm coding." And he was coding about as fast as you could type. And I said, "Yeah, well, what's that book?" He said, "I'm learning Mandarin." And I just stared at him. I said, so he was coding and learning Mandarin at the same time.
Oh my God.
He's not exactly one of us. But the genius came out. The problem that they had was really a simple problem. How do we raise money in what was called a crowd sale at the time? The terminology keeps changing over the years, without going to prison. That was it.
For themselves, right?
Well, yeah, for me too, at that point, yeah.
I'm saying, but they wanted to do a crowd sale for Ethereum.
Correct. We needed to raise money, but they didn't know how to raise money because it was clear the concept of this being a security was already, that's not new law. If you want to sell something, and people had, kickstarted comparisons and other kind of crowd sale comparisons, and there was the Jobs Act and stuff. There was all kinds of different legislation that made it clear that this was dangerous area. And so I took it upon myself to figure out a way, solely for the purpose of making the project happen, to find a way legally to get this done. And by legally, I meant really it was a structure that worked, that was legally viable, and I believe we have maybe the only solid opinion that was ever given out, because I don't think anybody's been dumb enough to probably give an opinion since then. And so we connected with a good law firm. I did most of the research. Was fortunate that, I'll tell you what we did, but there was a former chief of the SEC that I was in daily conversations with, and we realized that very quickly that we have these round pegs, these things called tokens, and the Securities Acts, 33 to 34, the regulations underneath those, and other ones as have been talked about, were the square hole. They just simply didn't fit. So we had to come up with some methodology that made sense, that we could argue, and the only way we could do it at the time was by way of analogy. And so we had to look at similar areas, and we had to we finally honed in on this thing called functionality. And is there any functionality? And we looked at Bitcoin, said Bitcoin doesn't really have much functionality, but it's pretty much a currency, didn't really have much functionality. But Ether, on the other hand, did have some functionality. There was a couple of things that Ether in particular did that were, one was similar, one was unique to it. And one was that you actually needed Ether to send Ether. So it's, it's kind of like putting stamps in an envelope, but you need a stamp to still send those stamps, right? And so that was one functionality. But the one that was really interesting and different was that you needed Ether to fuel, that was the terminology, these decentralized applications. So these are all these cool things that we're seeing ICOs on today. They're all decentralized applications, and any of them that are being based on the Ethereum protocol eventually will need Ether to fuel those applications.
So you come up with this idea, now you need the lawyer to opine that this is a good thing, that this is legal, that you can now, because of this, you can do what we now call an ICO.
Yeah, I mean, they thought I was pretty much out of my mind, and it was fortunate that we did have some higher authority, the former head of the SEC, to chime in. And we eventually made the argument that due to this functionality, I don't think we want to go to the legal aspect of it, because this is more about what did I learn from it, that because by utilizing this functionality, we could get into a safe zone. And at the time, safe zone just really meant, at worst case, because we had got an opinion, we probably wouldn't be put in prison. And we weren't trying to do anything illegal. We were trying to do this. And this wasn't, right now we're in the Wild West. Back then it was just, there was nobody around.
So we only got a couple minutes left. Just real quick, can you just tell us about the ICO and then about the lessons learned?
Yeah, so the ICO itself was a watershed moment. It took us a month. We raised a gargantuan $18 million, which people are doing in about 10 seconds now. At the time, that was the largest crowd sale in history. So we were just astounded by the amount of interest. We had 15,000 participants. We had 50 Ethereum groups. We went. This was
what was the price? And what was the price?
What's that?
What was the price of Ether?
Oh, that hurts.